Hello learners, welcome back to the course on Learning and Development in Organization. Today, we'll look into the focal point of learning within an organization, which is the individual. The individual in organization, that would be our point of discussion. I'll be looking into the different theories that are coming your way in terms of learning and development specifically. We'll also look into the different barriers, different aspects which actually hinder the learning and development within an organization today. So, let's delve into this learning and development specific to individual in organization. I am Dr. Abraham Cyril Issac. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Business, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. Now, when you look into the individual in organization and specific learning, the session would revolve around the theme, failure is not fatal, but failure to manage might be. Many a time we tend to understand ourselves at some point in time as a failure. But please do understand that every single failure is a stepping stone to success, which we hear from right from our childhood. But how many of us do take it in the right spirit, learn or unlearn something that has gone wrong, relearn and get into get the desired outcome, what we actually wanted in the first place. So failure is not fatal, but failure to change might be. Now let's understand this from an individual angle. Let's understand the different theories actually reinforcing this particular argument. Individual learning includes the acquisition of knowledge, skills, behaviors and competence required to perform a job. Please note, our context is organization. That is why this specific course of learning is scoped around the organization specifically. So when you are talking about an individual within an organization, something which is very critical is the knowledge, something which is very obvious is the skills, the behavior pattern, and most importantly, the competencies. So this is what shapes the learning. Let's understand it from some research angle. Some empirical investigations have already gone through specifically. Aranda et al. 2017 described organizational learning as a development of new knowledge and insights that potentially impact the behavior. Now, when you look into this particular study, it has given a clear idea of what happens with respect to insights or new knowledge coming your way. Another study which I would want to underscore with this particular statement is according to Kim and Mobon, 1999. The organizational learning process refers to the ability of the organization to transform and integrate information and develop experiences across different segments of the network so that information can be widely available to all individuals and can be an introduction to create a new position overall. So these are some of the empirical backgrounds with which we try to define the organizational learning. There exists a diversity of focus in organizational learning definitions, if you ask me. Of particular, we have to look into two distinct types. One is the cognitive school and another is the behavioral school. Let's look into this in detail. When you are looking into cognitive, it highlights the thinking element of organizational learning, and the behavioral school on the other hand focuses on the doing dimension. So these are the critical differences. One is with respect to the thinking, another is with respect to the doing dimension within the learning. So the cognitive school reasons that learning occurs through our mental models, structures or schemas which enable us to understand events and situations and to interpret and respond to our environments. So the behavioral school asserts that we learn by gaining insight and understanding from experience through experimentation, let's say through something like observation, analysis and examination of outcomes. So when you are talking about a thinking based model, this is the cognitive school, whereas the behavioral school is more of an action oriented one or something that is all about doing the activity or doing dimension. So when you are looking into the studies of David Cope's 1984, learning model was defined as grasping, which entails conceptualization and understanding both mental processes. So, corroborating this point, even later scholars like McGill or Slocum in 1994 define organizational learning as responding to new information by altering the very programming by which information is processed and evaluated. So, these are some of the empirical investigations, as I already mentioned in my previous session also and in the introductory video, and people who have already attended my previous courses in NPTEL and SWAYAM platform will definitely vouch for the fact that I tend to bring in definitions and understanding from a more of an empirical standpoint. All the research literature pertaining to the point under discussion is called for, is actually taken in and incorporated to bring out a holistic understanding of the definition, and that's why we are going deeper into the definition of the process of learning. If you look into the following 4 processes, they constitute the act of learning in an organization, and this is according to Schilling and Clutch 2009. So, we have understanding, we have interpreting, we have integration, and finally we have institutionalizing. Let's look into this. Understanding is all about gaining new insights and ideas based on personal experience, whereas interpreting is deducting the relationship among insights, including the ability to explain the relationship to self and others. When you're looking into integrating, it's all about assimilating the new insights into groups to follow or allow for collective action. And institutionalizing, on the other hand, is all about implementing the shared understanding through organizational rules, organizational procedures, and even to a certain extent strategies. So, as this list implies specifically, if you ask me, organizational learning also occurs at different levels in an organization. It can occur at individual, it can occur at group and institutional. Now, let's look into the characteristics of learning organization. The first and the foremost one would be system thinking. But when you look into these characteristics of learning organization, one of the early proponents, if you ask me, of the learning organization concept was Peter Senge. Peter Senge in 2006 noted the presence of 5 main characteristics, the first one being system thinking. System thinking is about the understanding, and it's all about analyzing how all the components of an organization influence each other within the whole to find and eliminate obstacles to learning. Whereas you have the second element, the personal mastery. It is all about the individual commitment to self-improvement and the process of learning. Then you pertain to or move into mental models. Mental models are assumptions basically held by individuals and the organization that promote learning through their culture and mindset. Then you have shared vision. Shared vision means it's a common vision. It's a common vision that stimulates learning. And finally, you have the team learning. You talk about team learning, it's all about group cohesiveness. It's all about dialogue that motivate common team learning. Further defined, a learning organization as one skilled at creating, at acquiring and transferring knowledge, and at modifying its behavior to reflect new knowledge and insights. So, these are typically the characteristics of learning organization specifically. Now, let's look into the 3 unique theories of organizational learning, and this would be the crux of today's discussion. 3 classical theories. Experiential learning theory. You have what we get from the cognitive school. Adaptive and generative learning theory, also from the cognitive school. Assimilation theory from the behavioral school. So, these are the typical origin of these 3 theories. We will look into each of these theories in greater detail, because these theories do act as the fundamental block of our entire course. So, let us give these theories the due attention that it requires. Let's start with experiential learning theory by Copes. Copes 1984. Experiential learning theory, or sometimes also known as ELT, is based in psychology, it is based in philosophy, and it is also based on physiology, and has significantly influenced leadership and organization development and contributed to principles of learning organization since its introduction. So its basic premise is that learning occurs through the combination of grasping and transforming experience. So ELT, the experiential learning theory, constitutes of a four-stage learning cycle: concrete experience and the abstract conceptualization comprise the grasping component, while the reflective observation and the active experimentation make up the transforming experience component. So when you are looking into this learning process, it is characterized as a cycle in which learner proceeds through the sequence of experiencing, reflecting, thinking and acting in a repeating progression that is unique to each learning circumstance. Specifically, if you ask me, concrete experiences or experiencing spark observation and reflection, that is reflecting, which is internalized and integrated into abstract concepts, which is nothing but thinking, that spark new behavioral experimentation, which is acting. So this learning cycle can be entered at any point, but the stages are always followed in sequence. I repeat, this learning cycle can be entered at any point, but the stages are always followed in sequence. So the first one being foundation and influence. ELT typically is rooted in psychology, physiology, philosophy, significantly shaping leadership, OD, organizational development and learning organization. Then you understand this learning as a cycle. Learning occurs through the four-stage cycle, which I have already mentioned, like concrete experience, reflective observation, you have abstract conceptualization and active experimentation. So these are the typical four-stage cycle. And then you have a thought process of grasping versus transforming. The CE, which is concrete experience, and AC, which is abstract conceptualization, help individuals grasp experiences, while RO, which is reflective observation, and AE, which is active experimentation, allow them to transform experiences into learning. Then the sequential and continuous process, as I already mentioned, the cycle follows a sequence of experiencing, reflecting, thinking and acting, repeating uniquely in different learning situations. Now let's look into the adaptive and generative learning theory. Adaptive and generative learning theory, again, if we just look into the Copes ELT model influenced scholar, the Peter Senge, whom we talked about just now, evolved another cognitive theory of organizational learning that prominently identified mental models, deeply ingrained assumptions, generalizations or pictures and images that influence how we understand the world and how we take action. So as a crucial component, the other four of the five disciplines required for acquiring skills and competencies at the individual level, at the team level and the organization level as introduced in Senge's theory are personal mastery, building shared vision, team learning and systems thinking. So one of the important principles of Senge's work, if you ask me, is the differentiation between adaptive and generative learning. So he characterizes adaptive learning as focusing on the foundation of existing knowledge and amending that with new thinking to accomplish an objective. So this kind of learning is particularly salient to organizations seeking continuous improvement. For example, understanding the gaps between one's own firm's productivity, quality, cost or market agility and that of the competition enables the generation of additional ideas by which to close those gaps. It would be essential that the individuals at team level and at organization level get in for learning. So the adaptive and generative learning theory, we do understand it has an influence by Cope's ELT and Singer's theory. Peter Senge expanded on Cope's model by introducing the mental models and the 5 disciplines which I just mentioned, personal mastery being one, shared vision being another, team learning, systems thinking and mental models being other disciplines as essential for organizational learning. Then you have an element of adaptive learning, focuses on incremental improvements by refining existing knowledge and strategies to enhance productivity, quality and competitiveness. It is essential for continuous improvement within the organization. Then you have the element of generative learning. It involves what we understand as a radical innovation. Radical innovation by creating entirely new strategies, products or resources, driving transformative change within organization. Then there is mass exploration versus exploitation concept. Exploitation leverages existing knowledge for efficiency, while exploration focuses on experimenting and seeking new opportunities for growth. Now let's look into the third theory, which is the assimilation theory. Assimilation theory, please note ladies and gentlemen, it is different from the cognitive theories. Behavioral approaches to organizational learning emphasize the action-based changes that take place as individuals learn through performance. So these approaches characterize learning as observable, rational and quantifiable. So scholars like Nevis, DiBella and Gould's 1995, their theory presents a learning process featuring 3 unique stages. One is of course knowledge acquisition, where it is all about development or creation of skills, insights and relationship. Then you have knowledge sharing, characterized by the dissemination of what was or what has been learned. Then you have the knowledge utilization, which comprised of the integration of learning to make it broadly available and generalized to new situations. So all 3 of these stages are strongly behavior linked and focused on practical application more than cognition. So to flesh out these 3 stages, the researchers propose 7 learning orientation, and these orientation further define the mindset and methods by which typically learning occurs. If you ask me, the first would be knowledge source. Is knowledge developed internally or acquired externally? That's the biggest question. Second would be the product process focus. Focus on what the organization produces versus how it develops and delivers its products or services. Then you have the documentation mode, which is all about individual possession of knowledge versus its public availability. And then you have the dissemination mode, sharing learning through formal organization-wide methods versus informal methods. Then you have the learning focus as a 5th element, which is incremental versus transforming learning. Then you have the value chain focus, investing in design and make functions versus market and deliver functions. Then you have the skill development focus, development of individuals versus team skills. So the final component of the scholars model is these facilitating factors. Let's look into the key points of the assimilation theories now. The first one is action-based learning. Unlike the cognitive theories, behavioral approaches focus on observable, measurable changes that occur through performance, emphasizing practical application over cognition. So if you ask me, the most signifying factor is observable and measurable changes that occur through performance. So this is what distinguishes it from the cognition element. The second aspect would be 3-stage learning process. As I mentioned, one being knowledge acquisition, KA, another being knowledge sharing, KS, and the third one being knowledge utilization. You talk about knowledge acquisition, it is all about developing skills, insights and relationships, as we just understood now. Knowledge sharing is all about spreading the learned knowledge across the organization, and knowledge utilization is all about integrating learning for broader application in new situation. Then the 7 learning orientations which we just discussed, how learning occurs. This is defined by these learning orientation. Knowledge source, it could be internal versus external. Documentation, it could be individual versus public. Dissemination, it could be formal versus informal. Learning focus, which could be incremental versus transformative. These are some of the key orientations. And finally, facilitating factors, structures and process that enhance learning effectiveness, shaping how organizations implement and sustain the learning practices are vital. Now let's move into one of the most interesting aspect of learning, which is loop theories of learning, single, double, etc. Let's look into the term single and double loop learning. It was first introduced by organizational theorist Argyris and Shawn in 1974. Single loop learning is defined as an attempt to solve problems with minimal variation in method without questioning underlying assumptions about how work is supposed to be done. Let's say in the organizational context, it is a mere behavioral change that aims to resolve a problem. Its interest is in finding out what the problem is and ways in which things could be done more effectively rather than asking why the problem occurs. So this is single loop learning. In contrast, if you look into double loop learning, it is defined as a process of inquiring into the assumptions or mental models that govern our actions. So it's a total reframing of our cognitive schema, which could lead to fundamental changes in our behavior. So in this sense, behavioral changes derived from double loop learning are more powerful and transformative than those from single loop learning, because the former entails a deep level change in our cognitive framework. And this is the beauty of double loop learning. And let's now understand triple loop learning. Having understood single loop, double loop, triple loop learning is a form of learning that goes beyond single and double loop learning. It has the potential to transform the deepest parts of ourselves. It serves as a basis for process of the most fundamental and profound change. Or in other words, if you ask me, I will put it like this: radical innovation in ourselves. This is what triple loop learning is capable of. If single loop learning is focused on nature of doing, let me synthesize our understanding now. If single loop learning is focused on nature of doing and figuring out the most effective way to accomplish goals, and double loop learning is concerned with the nature of knowing and challenging what the right goals are to be pursued, then triple loop learning is related to the nature of being and reshaping our intentions, our purposes and our motives. So single loop learning is all about fixing errors by adjusting actions within existing rules. Double loop learning questions and changes underlying assumptions and rules. Triple loop learning transforms thinking by redefining values, goals and mindsets. So these are typically what we understand as the single loop, double loop and the triple loop learning altogether. So this understanding acts as the fundamental block as we more and more deeper into learning and development specifically. Let's understand the loop theories and diversity management specifically. When you are looking into the different types of learning, that is single loop, double loop, triple loop, the shift from discrimination and fairness to access and legitimacy through single loop learning, which focuses on behavioral adjustments, whereas the transformation from access and legitimacy to learning and effectiveness happens using double loop learning, which involves cognitive reframing. And finally, the potential for triple loop learning, a deeper ontological shift in how organizations perceive diversity, explore through constructivist developmental action inquiry. This is what triple loop learning is all about. So, the study has theoretical implications by integrating triple loop learning into diversity management, into practical applications for corporate leaders. So, when you look into the purpose specifically, single loop learning is all about adjusting actions within existing assumptions. As I mentioned just now, double loop learning is about questioning and changing the underlying assumptions, and triple loop learning goes a step ahead, transforming identity, the purpose and the way of being. And when you translate the same into diversity management specifically, companies comply with diversity laws and train minorities to fit into corporate culture, which is possible through single loop learning. Whereas when you look into companies that recognize diversity as a strategic advantage and integrate it into business practices, that can be done with the help of double loop learning. And then you have organizations that redefine diversity holistically, embedding inclusion at personal, interpersonal and structural levels specifically. So, these are typical loop theories that are available to you. Now, let us look into something which is very vital. Every time we have lot of theories which help us to understand the underlying concept or construct, then we try to give a better understanding or definition to that, then we try to dig deeper into it, but somewhere this learning and development, for example, or any other concept for that matter, is not successfully implemented in an organization. The reason is there are always barriers for these concepts, and there are barriers to organizational learning also. So, I would like to spend some time here with respect to understanding the barriers of organizational learning. Please note, there are two types of barriers to organizational learning. One is on a personal level, personal barriers. Second is more endemic, group and organizational barriers. When you talk about these barriers, personal barriers happens with respect to personal biases. We have sometimes stereotypes, we have certain preconceived notions against a set of people, which will be right or wrong, we don't know, but maybe to reduce the cognitive load, we do have this. But the problem with these personal biases is these act as a personal barrier towards learning. Another significant aspect is the lack of motivation. When you look into the motivation element, sometimes you are just part of an organization because of the monetary benefit, because of some particular extrinsic motivator. But as time passes, you feel that you are disengaged from the organization. So, learning takes the back seat. It acts as, lack of motivation acts as a personal barrier. Another significant factor could be high degree of stress. Many a time what happens that people are overburdened, there is a lot of fatigue, there is a lot of too much of work pressure that people cannot absorb all these stress. This also translates into a personal barrier. Lack of skills sometimes, for learning something you need to have a background. Maybe you do not possess that, or maybe you are in a position that you are not able to obtain that skills, or you are not having the skills in the first place. All these factors act as a personal barrier. You have sometimes trust deficit. You do not trust the co-worker. Many a time I cite the examples I have with respect to my research in knowledge hiding. When it comes to knowledge hiding, there is always, knowledge hiding is the intentional withholding of knowledge when requested. So, when there is somebody, one of your colleague is asking you something, knowing perfectly that you know what is supposed to be the answer, but you tend to shy away, or you don't tend to give the information, or any strategy you employ to not give the information, then there initiates a lack of trust. Now, the same thing next time, I'm going to ask something to that particular person, most probably he or she will not reciprocate. He or she will not give back the information. So there is a distrust loop that is created. This distrust loop creates a trust deficit within the organization, and this is also one of the significant personal barrier, if you ask me. And finally, there is fear of punishment. If I am sent for this particular training to learn something, what happens if I do not understand this? If I am not able to reproduce it, will I be punished for that because I'm making use of some investments from the organization side? Organization is investing time, cost, labor, whatever it is, money for that particular training, and still if I'm not able to give back that to the organization, if I'm not able to reciprocate that information to my fellow workers, then that will also act as a personal barrier. Let's look into some of the group and organizational barriers specifically. You look into lack of clear goals. It emerges as one of the clear barrier because it hinders effective learning. There could be a possibility of minimal feedback, where you are looking into insufficient feedback that can prevent individuals and teams from understanding the performance and learning from their experiences. There could be strict work rules, overly rigid rules that can stifle creativity and experimentation, which are vital for learning. There could be a possibility of excessive competition. If you ask me, too much competition among employees can discourage collaboration and knowledge sharing. Blaming culture could be a part of your organization. A culture of blame inhibits learning by making individuals afraid to take risks or admit mistakes. Leaders can influence actions and learning behaviors, so avoiding public embarrassment for mistakes is crucial. And finally, resistance to change. In AI, in HRM course, in the NPTEL platform itself, we have excessively discussed on this particular point, which comes up as a barrier in invoking AI into the human resource management practices. Similarly, resistance to change. People set in their ways may resist adopting new processes, showing proof that a new way is better. Supporting staff during the transition or providing onboarding materials can be some of these aspects to overcome these barriers. So, to combat these barriers, if you ask me, create a supportive learning environment that is vital, that is crucial, where workers feel safe to ask questions, take risks and agree. Leaders should reinforce learning, and structured processes should be in place for exploring new ideas with adequate time for thought and a reflection. So, in this particular session, we have looked into a detail of theories which acts as a fundamental block of our entire course. We looked into different processes, different perspectives in those theories. Then we looked into the barriers, the personal barriers we had a discussion on. We looked into the organizational specific barriers. Please do understand that whatever be the effort you put in for increasing the learning and development in an organization, but if you are not able to actually bring out or curtail or stop these barriers, prevent these barriers, all your efforts will go in vain. That's all from me in today's session. We'll come out with more details about learning and development in the next class. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.